Here's an explanation that passes a little bit better muster, at least I'm going to tell you that it does, and that is the, if I can get it to work, there we go, the dominance of the liberal political culture. If you remember earlier in the semester when we talked about the fact that there's been a dominant system of political thought in the United States really throughout our history, liberalism has been the dominant system of thought. It probably shouldn't surprise you then that I would suggest to you that that dominance of liberal political thought would play into this explanation for dominant two-party politics. The argument here is basically something like this. Let me get to the right spot here. Remember we talked about, you can think about liberalism occupying the middle of a continuum, something like that. Right? We talked about that notion. Right? On one end you have anarchism, the other end you have totalitarianism, liberalism. Occupies the middle of that continuum because liberals have recognized a need for government, but also the need to place restraints on the authority of government. Okay? So, what we didn't say back when we were talking about that earlier in the semester is that if you take the global view of political parties, look at political parties around the world. Don't just look at the American system. Look at political parties all around the world in democratic systems. What we find is that political parties tend to occupy, they are organizations that articulate ideological alternatives. So just like I told you earlier in the semester, we can place competing ideologies all along this continuum. Okay? We can also then place political parties, something like that. Okay? Where, I'm certainly not an expert on global political parties. I might have to get my colleague in here, Professor Record, here to straighten me out. But as far as I can tell, about the closest we can get to a political party that advocates pure anarchist ideology would be the left. You get the Freedom Party of Canada, the UK Independence Party, the American Libertarian Party. Moving past the middle, we get the Labour Party in the UK, the New Democratic Party of Canada, and all the way down there to the end, what would be a political party that represents totalitarian ideology or that articulates totalitarian ideology? How about the Communist Party of North Korea? Okay? So we've got political parties all along this continuum that are articulating these ideological alternatives. Now, if liberalism occupies the middle of the continuum, and I'm going to tell you that the Democratic and Republican parties have historically both articulated liberal ideology or embraced liberal ideology, then it stands to reason that we would put the Democratic Party and the Republican Party of the United States in the middle of this continuum, right? And so notice the distance between the American Democratic Party and the American Republican Party is not that great. That's a visual way of me trying to represent or suggest to you that somehow both the Democratic Party and the Republican Party are closer to one another, at least historically have been closer to one another than either are. That keeps drifting out there. I'll explain to you why that happens here in just a second. But the Democratic and Republican parties historically have been closer to one another ideologically than recall that in American politics we like to say, particularly these days, that the Democratic Party is the left and the Republican Party is the right. But, boy, that's in a pretty narrow range of alternatives. It's not like the Democratic Party is the left in the same context that we would be talking about, say, the New Democratic Party of Canada, or some of these other truly left-wing political parties. Or that the Republican Party is like a right-wing party like, say, the Freedom Party of Canada. Well, I drew that thing so that the Republican Party, I think, a good case can be made in the last couple of decades has moved to the right somewhat. Whether it's actually now outside this, I don't. This is a broken line for a reason. I don't know exactly where to draw that line. It's pretty clear that the Republican Party has moved to the right somewhat, at least over the last couple of decades. Whether that's something that will last, will persist, or whether the Republican Party will at some point move back towards the middle remains to be seen. Oftentimes it's hard to know when you're in the middle of a period and something like that, like we are now, and the Republican Party is noticeably more conservative today than it had been in the past. It's hard to know whether that's something that's going to stick or whether it's going to push back towards the middle. Based on what, my knowledge of how the American system works, I think many other people, analysts, would agree that at some point the Republican Party is going to have to move back toward the middle. In fact, I would have predicted that would have already happened, but it hasn't happened yet. In fact, maybe that's the contribution that Donald Trump has made to American politics, is that it's allowed, or it has resulted in the Republican Party being decidedly more conservative than it maybe would be under other circumstances. So we'll see. We just have to wait for time to play out on that question. So, any questions though about the basic point I'm trying to suggest to you here? Okay, so again, the argument says that given the dominance of liberal political thought, this movement of the Republican Party to the right really began back in the latter part of the previous decade. About 10, 12 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, with the emergence of the so-called Tea Party faction. We don't talk about the Tea Party faction in Republican Party politics anymore like we did 10 years ago. But those people are still there. They're still out there, okay? And they're still having a marked influence on the Republican